All right. So I think we're going to begin. Nice to see everybody. This is our last class of the whole intro to Judaism. So today we're going to pull some things together. We're going to do a little bit of review, and we'll be talking about Tikkun Olam, about repairing the world and social justice, and that part of Judaism that sends us out into the world to make a difference. And we're going to also be thinking about what is the essential teaching of Judaism, what's the most important part of Judaism, and also thinking about for our own selves, what do we think is the most important of Judaism for ourselves. But before we begin all of that, we're going to do a little bit of a recap, and we're going to do a test. We're going to do an end of year test to see what we've learned. So I'm just going to pull that up, and we'll do it. We would usually do this individually, but we're going to be doing this instead all together. So nobody has to worry. Everybody passes, but you get special mitzvah points if you get it right. All right. So let's go. Okay. This is the end of course review. Can everybody see? And Ruby, I know you're there. So if you have an answer, you can also put it in the chat. So the first thing here is you have to match the left side and the right side. What is fleishik or basari?
Meat.
Meat product.
Meat.
Meat product. Very good. What about milchik or chalavi? Again, fleishik and milchik are the Yiddish terms, and basari and chalavi are the Hebrew terms.
And I don't know the Hebrew terms. That's a dairy product.
Dairy product, right? If you go to someone's house who keeps kosher in that sense, they often will have red and blue stickers on different drawers and on different items to remind you of what everything is. Because if not, how you don't mix up your utensils and plates and cupboards. And okay, what about parv?
A food neither.
Yeah. Very nice. Hamotzi.
Hamotzi is the blessing after the meal, right?
Great.
Bread.
Bread before eating bread.
Oh, hamotzi.
What did you say? No, hamotzi is the blessing before eating bread. Yeah.
Bread. That one's the blessing after. No.
Birkat Hamazon is the blessing after meal. Hamotzi is the blessing before eating bread. Yeah.
Right.
Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. But that's what we call it. We call it hamotzi. Treif. What is treif?
Kosher. No, that's you can't
not
eat.
Kosher.
You can't eat.
Unkosher. Yeah, treif is unkosher. There's a restaurant in New York, I guess for Jews who don't eat kosher, and it's called treif, and it's everything on the menu is treif, not kosher. Shchita.
Kosher slaughter.
That's a slaughter.
Kosher
is good stuff. Stuff you can eat.
Yeah, ritually fit for eating.
That.
Yeah. And kosher, the word kosher doesn't only apply to food, it applies to many things. Birkat Hamazon, said it before. The series of
blessings after a meal.
Yeah.
David Schwartz can really do that.
Yeah.
Which one? Birkat Hamazon?
Yes. Remember at the Kla. And he's really good at that.
I remember when I first met David Schwartz was at a summer camp, and he was I was head of prayer and the spiritual advisor to the camp, and he did a bunch of different things, but he loved to teach Birkat Hamazon to the kids with hand motions. That was his trademark, one of his trademarks. And actually, he'll be teaching a class on Birkat Hamazon, I think, for those who want to learn in the coming months. Okay. In order to be potentially kosher, a fish must have these two features.
Fins and gills, or scales and gills.
Beautiful.
No, fins and scales. Okay. I know it's scales.
Scales.
Fins and scales.
Scales, yeah. In order to be potentially kosher, a mammal must have these two features.
It has to chew the cud and have cloven hoofs.
Split hoofs, yeah. Yeah, chew cud and split hoofs. Circle which birds are potentially kosher.
Chicken,
Chicken.
turkey,
Goose,
maybe.
turkey.
Depends.
Ostrich? No.
It's not a bird of prey.
Yeah, it's not a bird of prey.
Vulture,
Ostrich?
definitely not.
The vulture's out. It's a bird of
Vulture's
prey.
out. You're right. So goose is in, and ostrich is also out because ostrich is not in the list of animals. That's so there's no ostrich, not kosher.
But there's no particular reason that ostriches couldn't be kosher, is there?
There is.
It's not on the list.
It's not on the list of kosher. Yeah, there's a list of all the animals all the birds are considered to be kosher. Some of them are ruled by principles, and some are just lists. So what are a few examples of food that can never be kosher?
No, animals that eat other animals.
Predators.
Birds are prey animals.
Yeah, that's true.
Bacon,
pork, yeah.
Bacon cheeseburger.
You got
ham and cheese on rye. Ham and cheese on matzah.
Exactly. Which one of these is not a generally accepted hechsher?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know lots of folks from Oklahoma. I've worked with them, so that's why I'm chuckling.
Oh, that's funny.
All right, match a type of dish. That was the easy one, right? So match a type of dish to the way it is koshered. Metal.
Glass is the first one.
You're right. Glass, as if it is clean, it can be used for both meat and dairy interchangeably. It does not need to be kosher. So I just got that question from someone a few weeks ago who asked me, I've got a bunch of glass plates. He's a young man who did a class a few years ago who gained more kosher in his family. And he asked about glass plates. You have to kosher them. I said, nope, just wash them in high temperature and your
metal is used once, can be koshered by immersing in boiling water because it's not porous.
Right.
Exactly.
And ceramic is the last one because it is porous.
Yeah, ceramic is porous, can never be koshered, and gotta throw it away. Okay.
No, I'm not going to do that one.
Judaism in the Middle Ages. Rashi.
Well, it's not. I have no idea.
Or any of them, anybody?
I think Rashi is the third one.
Yes. Rashi is the greatest commentator on Torah and Talmud. And his comments are always studied with the traditional text. Rashi is the foundational commentator. There are even some commentators who all they do is comment on Rashi. They're called super commentaries. All they do is comment on Rashi. Okay, next, Rambam or Maimonides.
That's the last one. Guide to the Perplexed.
Yeah, the greatest work of Jewish, no?
Yeah. So Rambam, right? There's a big disagreement between the people who are Jewish leaders who are philosophers and who believe in halakha about whether Maimonides was primarily a philosopher or whether he was a halachist. And he was the author of the greatest work of Jewish law of the medieval period, the Mishnah Torah, and the greatest work of Jewish philosophy, the Guide for the Perplexed. Joseph Caro. It's a little bit more obscure. But Joseph Caro is the author of the most widely accepted code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch. And so the Caro, he lived in Tzfat, and he was a mystic himself, as all the other Tzfat mystics. But he composed the the work of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, which means a set table, because it takes all of the previous halakha and just says, you know, what's a guide? How do I do this, this, and this? He just spells it out. So it's like a set table. And that's still used by the conservative and Orthodox world, though the conservative Jewish world has modifications. We still use as our basis the Shulchan Aruch. So that's Joseph Caro, Moshe de Leon or Shimon Bar Yochai.
Shouldn't be so much of a trouble, but about mystic.
So it's definitely associated with Kabbalah, but at least one of these men was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, author of the Zohar. And finally, Isaac Luria. And Isaac Luria he was the chief of the Tzfat mystics, which included Caro, and he composed a theory of God's cosmic brokenness we'll talk about later, and our purpose on earth. Okay, so let's continue. We're gonna do a little bit more. So this is a little bit harder. So marriage, before the wedding ceremony, many brides and grooms have the custom to immerse in a
Mikvah.
Mikvah. Very nice. Some will continue to visit the mikvah on a monthly basis in accordance with the laws of, this is probably a hard one.
Taharat HaMishpacha.
Beautiful. Taharat HaMishpacha, the laws of purity. The wedding begins with the signing of the marriage document, the
Ketubah.
very nice, which is signed by two witnesses. After this, the bride is veiled in a ceremony known as the
Bedekin.
Yeah, Bedekin. Very nice. The couple then stands together under the.
I know this one.
The couple under the chuppah, where they will exchange rings in the ceremony known as Kiddushin. Yeah, Kiddushin. And the person who does the wedding is often called the Masader Kiddushin.
Right.
Okay.
Sheva brachot.
Yeah, Sheva brachot, or 7 blessings, are then recited for the couple, as they've been recited for every Jewish couple for at least 2,000 years. At the close of the wedding, the groom proceeds to
a glass,
and everyone yells,
Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov. All right. The couple then spends a few minutes by themselves in Yichud, yeah, before greeting their guests. Yichud is don't have to. It was in ancient times. The couple had a few minutes to themselves after the wedding to seal the deal, so to speak. All right. Jewish life cycle, birth and bar mitzvah. The Jewish tradition provides for ceremonies for the birth of both boys and girls. A ceremony for a baby boy is called a
Brit.
Brit Milah.
Yeah. Brit Milah or bris.
Brit.
Brit Milah is, I think, what they mean there. Often referred to simply as a bris, from the word meaning covenant. Yeah. The ceremony takes place on the 8th day of life and is officiated by a Mohel. Yeah, Mohel. Often together with the family's rabbi. For baby girls, the
naming ceremony? Naming?
Yeah. They don't have a name. They have the word Simchat Bat.
Oh, does that mean naming?
Happiness of the daughter. Yeah.
Joy of a daughter. Yeah. Welcomes her into the Jewish people. At both ceremonies, children are given a name, which will be used whenever they're called to the Torah, and also when they're married and when they pass away. When the Jewish child reaches the age of
13 for boys, 12 for girls.
12 for girls, they become bar mitzvah. They help to lead the prayer service and are called to the Torah for an Aliyah. They typically also chant a section from the prophets called the Haftarah and deliver a speech called a
Dvar Torah.
They're also then considered a Jewish adult that can be counted in a minyan or prayer quorum, and can wear ritual items, including
Talit,
tefillin.
tefillin, right?
All right. Okay, we're almost there. Chevra Kadisha, now we're death and mourning.
That's the Holy Society?
Yeah. They have the Holy Society made up of volunteers who attend to a body following a death and perform the ritual washing, tahara, and dressing, tachrichin. And we have a Chevra Kadisha between our synagogue and the local Reform synagogue that will do it for anybody who wishes to go to them. People who do this find it to be very powerful and meaningful. Not everybody has the stomach for it, but Kriya.
Tearing garment.
Yeah, Kriya is tearing, right? We tear a ribbon often in our days, but in biblical times, in the Orthodox community, when people hear the news, they try and tear their shirt, or sometimes they'll take a razor and rip their shirt. El Malei Rachamim.
I can remember when I was young at funerals, they would cut the men's ties if they were.
Yeah, I remember that.
With a razor?
I don't know what they cut them with, but I remember the cut
ties. Half cut ties, yeah.
Interesting. El Malei Rachamim.
That's a funeral prayer?
That's a prayer.
That's the funeral prayer.
Yeah, that's right. The funeral prayer that asks that God shelter and protect the soul of someone who has died. And that's a prayer that's almost completely associated with funerals and death.
That one's the eulogy, obviously.
Hesped is a eulogy.
That's the final one is the shoveling. The way is showing.
Paying it forward.
Yeah. Shoveling. Community's final way of showing chesed shel emet. True love, true kindness. It's a verse from Genesis. And
children.
Right. They say, because right, if someone
brothers and sisters.
Most times when we do a good deed for someone, we expect something back. When you do a deed for someone who's dead, they're not going to repay you so easily. So consider it to be true kindness. Okay, the following are the categories of relatives for which one is required to observe the rituals of mourning.
Parents, children, spouse, and siblings.
Yep, you got it. And then this is the final.
Shiva is
7 days.
It's a 7-day period.
Shloshim is 30.
Shloshim is a 30-day period following burial. Yahrzeit.
That is the anniversary. I know that.
Yeah.
I do that every month.
Yahrzeit is the
anniversary. Is yearly.
Well, it's like 4 times a year. That's said on 4 times a year.
Yizkor is a. Yeah.
Yizkor is a service. It takes place on Yom Kippur and each of the Shalosh Regalim is the name for the 3 pilgrimage holidays. Typically, one of the best attended services, Yizkor, and there is an old custom where if both of your parents are alive, you step out of the room for Yizkor. Kaddish. Yeah.
Mourner's prayer.
Yeah.
Prayer recited by him.
Unveiling
is the one recited.
Yeah. For the headstone. Unveiling is for the headstone, usually before 1 year after burial. So this is the end of the review part. So this is the Shoah. As a member of a Jewish community, how does the memory of the Shoah affect your life and values? Anybody want to have anything quickly to everyone want to say anything? Or it can be something you struggle or that however you want to talk about it.
Well, I'll tell you, every time I hear the prayer for peace, where it says that we shall know war no more, I think of how frustratingly, seemingly impossible that is.
Because of because of the history of the Jewish people and everything they've been through.
I mean, yeah. And I hear it a lot more now because he's been service here. So every time I hear the prayer for peace, I think,
yeah,
boy.
Well, it's always something present in my mind, as if aside from thinking about, I know family members, I don't know who they are, but they were lost. And I just found a cousin who went through that in Russia, and then just through Ancestry several weeks ago. And he was telling me, so it has a direct connection to my family. I always think about what there's always a potential for this type of thing to return. So that affects my thinking and my attitudes about a multiple number of things. Just my viewpoint of the world and what I should be careful about and what we have to be considering what may happen. And it's just not us. It can happen to other groups of folks. So one has to recognize the indications, and how does one try to mitigate the potential that something like this will become more intense again.
Well, it did though. I mean, look what happened in Africa, Uganda. I mean, it's still happening.
In Darfur.
Right? Still happening.
It's still happening. Yeah.
It's you can find so many different places in the world.
Yeah, when we went to the Holocaust Museum, the Illinois Holocaust Museum, they had a thing on, was it Darfur or Uganda?
It was Darfur.
Yeah, and you know, it's entirely equivalent what happened there.
Right.
It's interesting how the Shoah has both a universal lens of being, as we're saying, something that's never let it happen to anybody else, and it's also the worst act of worst period of anti-Semitism after 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. So it also feels very personal to the Jewish people. It's very much part of our story.
And something else one has to remember is that if there hadn't been Hitler, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
So one person could cause that.
One person full of hate can do a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about Zionism in Israel?
So Israel frustrates me. I'm sorry. I was a little not agreeing with what's her name? What was her name? Barry Weiss.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly Klein Halevi, I totally agree with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was very logical, very Weiss is more of a sermon.
Yeah. Also, I mean, she sounded like Israel can't do anything wrong, and
yeah. He also had no problem saying what was wrong there.
Oh, our dog is going to bark for a while. Our lawn guys are here.
Okay, well, you can hear it more than we do, so you don't have to worry too much. Anybody else want to talk about Zionism or Israel?
Muted. That's okay.
Okay. It's as I always say, we're living in an age where two of the biggest events in Jewish history happened in our generations. These are the two biggest events in Jewish history, maybe of all time, but maybe at least of the 2,000 years for sure. So we're living with these two. So they cast a big shadow over Judaism, over the Jewish people. And for many modern Jews in America who are not religious, the Shoah and Israel are two of the pillars of their identity. There are many Jews who don't go to synagogue, aren't affiliated, but they still have a very strong feeling about the Holocaust, and really it's a big part of their identity. And Israel is changing, but especially for the last few generations, there were again I remember being in Israel, and there were people who made Aliyah, who moved to Israel. They didn't have one religious bone in their body. It wasn't religious. It was just identity of being in a country where everybody was Jewish peoplehood. So we're going to stop this here. We're now going to turn focus a little bit, switch focus, and we're going to go deeper into our first class, the Jewish mission, and really talk about what is a Jewish mission. I mean, Judaism is such a vast tradition, and I remember after maybe 2-3 years of rabbinical school, studying night and day, endless texts, and then somebody saying, what we're learning is still just a drop in the bucket, right? So Judaism is so very vast. And so what is the Jewish mission? What is it that draws all of it together? All of this periods, all of the story, everything. What's the essential teaching? So I'd like you all to take a few minutes. If you have a pen and paper or just on your computer, think about it. We'll take a few minutes just to think about it and answer these questions. To the best of my knowledge, a Jew is what I find most compelling about Judaism, what I find most confusing about Judaism, and my next step. Just take a few minutes, think about it, write some notes if you'd like, and we'll come back in just a few minutes and see what everybody has to say. Okay, so let's come back. Anybody want to share, to the best of their knowledge, a Jew is?
I think a Jew is someone who thinks of themselves as a Jew, either culturally or religiously.
Okay. Beautiful. Anybody else?
Pretty much.
You don't have to push the button.
Go ahead, Ed.
I got pretty much same Judaism. Someone who feels a connection and part of a tribe.
Okay. Charles or Susan? Do you want to?
It's hard for me to articulate because I'm reluctant to use the word indoctrinated, but that's what I've lived with all of my life. And I identify with it, and I know about the technical definitions and the debates between the different sectors of what you would consider, how do you qualify, and then the other thing is whether you're following, if it's something innate or you're following the customs, and it's a religious philosophy that you follow, that you believe in, and cultural, well, in one sense or another, yeah, I would suppose so, but many people can follow something that's a culture, but do they have the commitment, the dedication, or the real sense of belonging besides enjoying Jewish food and Jewish music? So that's, to me, that's a gray area. But now we're getting off into tangent, and there's all sorts of debates about that. So
it's it is very interesting, and it's a big debate in America where, people, if you ask most Jews what they think about this, what are the top what's most important to their Judaism? I think, one of the surveys a few years ago, humor came out as one of the tops, Jewish humor, which is great. But the big debate is, how long does that identity last? How many generations before it disperses?
Because what is at the core? That's what we're discussing. What is at the core of our reason for, if you just say identifying as, you consider yourself to be following the Jewish religion?
Yeah.
Or not.
So what makes anybody a decider of whether somebody else is Jewish?
Correct. That's why I say you can get into a debate, and there's all sorts of discussions and that, and that can be a very heated topic. And I know when I was in Costa Rica and we were beginning to form our congregation, there were some very heated debates about that amongst folks, depending on their own particular life experiences. And so, I mean, it's a sensitive topic.
It's a very sensitive topic, and it's also, I mean, I often think about, on one level, who decides who's Jewish or not? Well, I'm a believing Jew, and I think it's not me. It's the guy up there, or the woman up there, whoever you want to say it, who decides who's Jewish or not. Not me. But since we are an institutional religion, right? We have institutions, organizations. We have to come together to decide on some level some norms, and because we have different streams of Judaism, it causes a lot of difficulties and heartache for people when it's different for depending where you are. So let's go to the next one. At this time, what I find most attractive or compelling about Judaism.
Well, I'm all right. I find the home and family-based stuff the most important.
The family home stuff?
Home and family-based stuff, yeah.
Wonderful. I agree. Judaism, one of the amazing things about Judaism is how much ritual and home life there is. And I've known Christian clergy who have said to me, we've got holy envy of how much stuff you can do at home, how all-consuming it is at home. And, there's always holy envy on every side. But anybody else? What's attractive about Judaism?
I think one thing I find attractive about Judaism is that, like they say, if you ask two Jews, you get three opinions. Judaism, there isn't always one right answer, and everything is in terms of a discussion and an argument, and not so much argument as debate. And there's always multiple sides to any issue, religious or otherwise.
So very true. There's very little doctrine in Judaism, which does lead to some confusing situations, but overall gives people a lot of freedom of thought and of finding their own theological place. I was reading recently about the story of a woman who decided to become in England an Anglican priest. And she was reading about she was talking about all of her long process of discernment and of grappling with what she believed and didn't believe and how it fitted the doctrine of the church and all these kinds of things. And these are questions that almost never come up in Judaism, because, your belief is personal, and 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and everybody has a different approach to tradition, different approach to God. So that means that there's a wide range of belief and of observance in most communities, which maybe takes away a little bit from the cohesive side, but there's a lot of freedom, which I think people are drawn to. What is the most troubling about Judaism or confusing about Judaism? This is a question I almost always ask at the Beit Din when people are choosing Judaism, because it's not because you're choosing Judaism that you shouldn't think that there's something that it's perfect.
The theological and the multitudinous of rules.
Yeah. Rules upon rules, and then you have to truly love the rules. You have to buy into the system as a whole. If you don't buy into the system as a rule, it seems very feels like it's coming out of left field sometimes. But it is. Anybody else?
Some of the treatment of women in more Orthodox Jewish communities.
Mm-hmm. It is. The Orthodox communities definitely are patriarchal, and when anybody who spends time in the Orthodox communities and you would ask them that question, why don't women have as many rites and ritual, and they would say, well, women are holier than men, they don't need to do all that stuff, and that doesn't go very far. It sounds like an excuse, right? So but yeah, definitely. And
so how much of these are actual rules or just their own traditional I'm reluctant to use the word prejudice, or their own particular viewpoint that you can't necessarily substantiate in the basics?
It's true. Some are maybe not from the foundation, but the truth is a lot of the laws that now to us seem so outdated in their times are revolutionary. The ketubah, the wedding document, and now you read it and it says, the man owns the wife, and if there is, God forbid, a divorce, has to give her, 20 pieces of 200 zuzim and a goat, and all these things feels very medieval, and it's older than medieval time. But at its time, it was considered revolutionary that a woman should get anything if the relationship breaks up. So a lot of these laws were revolutionary in their time and were steps above what else was going on. But the Orthodox, they're very reluctant to change things, and things get locked into place. And so even shchita, which is ritual slaughter, right? At its time, it was a very humane way of slaughtering animals. I mean, you're supposed to, right? When you slaughter an animal, if there's a notch in the knife, it renders, which would give more pain to the animal, right? And then that renders that slaughter not kosher. So it was, all those laws were meant to be humane. These days we have even more humane ways of doing shchita. So at least my own position is I hope that one day we find a consensus to update some of our halakha to reflect modern ethical developments, but that could take a long time. So we're going to move forward. Does Judaism have, unless anybody wants to share what their next step will be, if there is one? Okay.
I just have keep learning.
Keep learning. That's it. Judaism, we got to keep on learning. Does Judaism have an essential teaching? We're going to look at some of the words of different teachers. So this curriculum was made in Los Angeles. So a lot of these rabbis, though Michael Siegel is here. So anybody want to read this first one? This is the longest one. All the other ones are shorter.
This has been, You must not remain indifferent. This has been my favorite verse in the Torah for as long as I can remember. And I do remember as a college student 30 years ago, the first time I picked up the Bible to read it on my own. The same semester that I met my wife, Alana, and God, I was clearly in the mood for love. Reading scripture on my own in English hit me with a force beyond description. I was thrilled by the drama and the pageantry, elevated by the wisdom, challenged by the vision of a just, compassionate, and righteous society, a vision yet to be implemented. Then I read these staccato words in the middle of a paragraph that speaks of our obligation to restore lost items to our fellow. The Torah terms him your brother. How are we to inconvenience ourselves to return lost property or clothing or livestock? We are then instructed, you must not remain indifferent. If you were looking for a 3-word summation of the entire Torah, that would be it. I've tried throughout my rabbinic work as a husband and father and friend not to allow myself to be indifferent. When I saw the exclusion and marginalization of GLBTQ people, I didn't let myself remain quiet. When I fathered a boy who struggles with autism, I didn't let myself remain quiet. I'm no saint, but that charge of Torah was a goad that would not let me hide. Another way to translate the verses, you may not hide. Rashi comments that we may not hide our eyes as though we didn't see the other's suffering. These powerful, uncompromising, stern words call to me to be who I am supposed to be. Whether tired or not, worn down or not, I can no longer hide. I must not remain indifferent.
Thank you. So let's read through all of them and then share which one we connect to the most. Next one, that was the previous one was from the dean of the rabbinical school where I attended. Anybody else? Next one, Rabbi Fenton.
The world is built through kindness. My revered and beloved teacher, Rabbi Dr. David Lieber of blessed memory, used to say the whole purpose of the Torah is to increase the kindness in the world.
Nice.
I like that one. We know that person.
Yeah.
Michael Siegel.
God said to Abraham, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Judaism begins with the relationship between God and Abraham. These words form an invitation to the descendants of Abraham to walk with God in every generation. This begins when we are willing to act and think differently than those around us. It begins when we are willing to set our watch to a covenantal time. Abraham was asked to act in order to be so. To be so, too are we.
Be so.
So too are we. Should be a comma after that be in my.
Yeah, there's a comma missing there. That's why it's so hard to read.
Okay, Rabbi Mark Borovitz. He's the rabbi of a Jewish addiction institution, the addiction recovery institution in Los Angeles, where not only Jews, but also other non-Jews go to recover from addiction, sometimes famous people. Anybody want to read this one?
One who saves a single soul is as if they saved an entire world. This points to the importance of each soul or person. We all matter and all of us are significant and worthy. Our job is to live our significance and worth out loud without fear and help others to do the same.
Thank you. Rabbi David Wolpe. Charles, do you mind reading this one? Rabbi David Wolpe was some years ago voted the top rabbi in America. They do have those lists, but he was voted down a few years ago, and then Rabbi Sherem Brous was voted instead top rabbi in America, and then they stopped doing it because they thought it did not seem good.
No, it doesn't.
How can you be in competition? How do you compare? But anyway, guard your soul carefully. The greatest gift is that we are in God's image. Our lives are the chronicle of how we relate to one another and shepherd our own divine spark.
Interesting story about David Wolpe. I mean, now if you meet Rabbi David Wolpe, he's like a total Hollywood operator, very smooth, kind of, you know, with the stars and everything. But he writes a lot. Very sincere man on another level. And I heard this story about him. His father was a well-known congregational rabbi in Philadelphia. And when David Wolpe was young, he kept telling his father, why do all the rabbis of your generation not talk about God? Like, why don't you talk about God? Why don't you talk about God? And he kept asking this to his father. So one day his father sent David Wolpe a postcard, and all it said on it over and over was God, 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 God. All right. And I'm not sure if what David Wolpe would say about that now. I hope he would still keep his fire. Okay, Rabbi Denise Eger.
What does God require of you? Only to do justice, love compassion, and walk humbly with your God. The prophet Micah gives us a threefold challenge: to take responsibility through the mitzvot that we do, to create a world filled with justice, to do so not as zealots, but with humility and compassion, and to walk with God in partnership as Abraham once did, with an outlook of loving kindness and commitment to the service of God and humankind. It is through this statement that I try to actualize Tikkun Olam, healing the world, balancing love, humility, and the need to take bold action for the sake of justice.
This is a statement we just read in Shul this last week. Consider one of the Talmud considers one of the bringing together all of Judaism. If you had to say Judaism in 3 statements, then this would be it according to Talmud. And now, okay, we have 2 more. All right, we'll do them. Let's do it. Judy, do you mind reading next one? Rabbi Steve Wernick, who used to be CEO of United Synagogue for Conservative Judaism, but is now the rabbi of a synagogue in Toronto, I think the biggest conservative synagogue in the country, in the continent.
Will not the judge of all earth do justice? With these words, Abraham confronts God over the destruction of Sodom. What I love about it is that not only does Abraham have the nerve to challenge God's righteousness, but that God seems to expect it. There is an expectation of struggling to bring justice into the world, even when it is God who seems to be acting unjust. To be Israel is to truly wrestle with God and humanity and to prevail. Like that one.
Nice. And finally, Rabbi Noah Kushner. Her father, Lawrence Kushner, is a very well-published Reform rabbi, and she's the rabbi of a congregation called the Kitchen. So you can imagine that's a little bit of a different kind of congregation if it's called the Kitchen, and they're in San Francisco, and they're one of the emerging communities. They're trying to do everything a shul does, but from a completely different place. And after they create meals for people, Shabbat meals, always after services, and either they have meals or the people can take them back home, and they have interesting music, and they wanted to give a sense of that they were doing something different when they called it the Kitchen. Sounds like a nightclub more than it does a synagogue, but they do great work. A good friend of mine is doing the music over there. So, okay. Ed, do you mind reading an angel?
An angel of Adonai appeared to Moses in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? In this verse, During one of the darkest moments in our history, God lights a strange fire and hopes someone will notice. Not only does Moses stop and pay attention, my father, Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, asks, how long would you need to watch the fire to know that burns but doesn't notice that a fire that burns but does not consume? Moshe asks a question: why doesn't the bush burn up? In that moment, one person prompted by God has demonstrated a capacity to see reality in front of him and also to question that reality. For why are things this way is only a small step away from, does it have to be this way? Might there not be another way? And with that, our story begins.
So Judy, it sounds like you like the will not the judge of all the earth do justice the most.
Yeah, I like that one.
Anybody else want to share what they liked? Which one they liked?
Well, I would say that I derive something from each one of them. And if you ask me what is some of the attractiveness for me for Judaism, even though I wouldn't question identifying as a Jew or considering any other option, these are some of the things that shall I say, give me some guidance. And one of the reasons why there's a sensitivity to how you deal with your fellow man, and with charity and justice and looking for kindness and respect of the co-inhabitants of this orb we're on. So.
Anybody else want to share what, if they have a different view or if they enjoyed any one of these specifically?
Did you?
Do you have any others, Ed, that you like? Any other essential view of what Judaism is about?
That one that you save a single soul, that is good.
Yeah, I like the one about Abraham at Sodom with you know.
Good thing you two were married.
Just the faith that Abram had, this unquestioning faith to just went and followed however you consider the message was conveyed to him, whether that was he actually heard there was an actual voice or something in her spirit, but they just had to break away from what you knew and step off into the unknown.
Yeah, very, very interesting. In some ways, maybe that's one of the threads linking all of these together, is the feeling, that sense of mission, and it doesn't matter what other people do or think, but feeling a sense of purpose and mission to better the world and to feel called to it and to work. And I think one of the one that's from Steve Wernick that both Ed and Judy liked a lot, will not the judge of all the earth do justice, which is very much highlighted in Judaism. I'm not sure if it's as much in the different Christian denominations or not, but the way we understand it, and this is a good segue to the next part of our learning today, is because of our partnership with God. You can't, if you're not a partner with God, you can't suddenly turn to God and say, hey, God, you have to do justice. You have to have a sense of partnership to be able to do it. And what is Brit Milah about? What is circumcision about, or the covenant itself? The covenant is a partnership between us and God, where we note that we're working together. And so there's a story I wanted to mention, one of my favorite stories in the Talmud, where Rabbi Akiva, who was the rabbi who saves Judaism after the destruction of the temples, where he comes to see, this is probably a fictional account, but it's teaching us something important, the Roman governor Rufus. And Rufus challenges him and he says, you Jews perform circumcision. Why would you perform circumcision? Didn't God create the world perfect? Why? So what does Rabbi Akiva do? Rabbi Akiva goes and he brings on one, and he shows Rufus on one hand flax and the other hand clothes, and he says, well, what's better, the flax or the clothes? And Rufus has to say, the clothes are better than the flax. And he goes and he gets wheat and bread, and he says, well, what's better, the wheat or the bread? and Rufus has to say, the bread is better. And he says, well, God gave us the world in a certain way, but our job is to better it, to work with God in partnership to improve it. We don't believe the world is perfect, but our job, our work in partnership with God is to better it. And that's what Tikkun Olam is, right? Tikkun Olam, which is a really important part of Judaism these days, which means repair of the world. I mean, the term has only maybe been used in the last 100 years the way we think of it now, in terms of social justice, in terms of doing acts of kindness and of charity, of treating everybody well. But the idea of Judaism as a religion that believes in these different components goes all the way back to Egypt, right? The moment he left Egypt, God says, don't mistreat a stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. That's Tikkun Olam. And Tikkun Olam was always viewed very broadly. We say in the Aleinu prayer, which ends our service, Letaken Olam b'malchut Shaddai, that we should fix the world with the kingship of heaven. And so these ideas go way back in Judaism. And I think in some ways they were even broader before. Originally, the words Tikkun Olam themselves, which mean Tikkun is repair, Olam is world, actually go back to the mystics of Tzfat in the 1500s, and the Ari, who was, we had him earlier, and he came up with this theory of how the world worked, which swept through Judaism and became one of our most important ideas, not only in the mystical tradition, but in others. And this is the basis of Tikkun Olam, that before the world was created, there was a universe, another universe. It was a vessel, and God poured his light into the vessel, and the vessel couldn't contain all of God's powerful light. So the vessel burst into endless shards of light, and the light got enveloped into klipot, into sheaths of darkness. And that's the world that we now live in, a world where all light is enveloped in sheaths of darkness. A broken world, right? A world of suffering. We look around us, it's hard not to see the suffering in this world. Look what happened in Florida last week. And you don't have to look, you can look in so many places in our own lives. So we live in a world of brokenness, but according to the Ari, our task is to go and release those sparks of light from the husks of darkness. So that was the original Tikkun Olam. The original Tikkun Olam was that theory. That's where really the term comes up, where you fix the world by going around the world, releasing the sparks of light, by bringing the world back to wholeness. And I think that gives an epic kind of lens to Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam isn't just a little act of kindness there, a little kind of act of kindness here, but you're part of some much greater work of bringing the world to wholeness and to peace. And part of that work for the Ari was also working on ourselves, Tikkun Nefesh, because when you fix yourself and you become more at peace in yourself and more loving yourself, then obviously that's going to translate into how you can fix the world. And so Tikkun Olam was always viewed in many different ways. It was always viewed as a complete way of looking at life. Our whole purpose is to walk through the world to fix it. So Tikkun Olam, has become such an important part, especially of Reform Judaism, but I'd say Conservative Judaism as well. In Reform Judaism, it is probably the very center of what they do. So anybody have any thoughts or questions about Tikkun Olam? Do you remember hearing about Tikkun Olam, or Charles or Judy or Susan? I guess Susan not. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, was Tikkun Olam?
No.
Was it, right?
No.
No.
Yeah.
This is just something I've heard say in the relatively recent years, but I have to say my religious education was very minimal. It was in that time in conservative synagogues. There wasn't much. You went to Hebrew school classes a few days a week, learned a little bit about Hebrew and a few stories, and almost by rote read off the Haftorah portion for the bar mitzvah with maybe a short speech. I can't even recall, but there was no in any further depth in instructing any about religious practices or precepts, except what you would pick up at home. Maybe go to the synagogue. So and this is one of the reasons I'm attending some of these classes. And over these past, I would say, the last half of my life, as I had realized I needed to have this identity and also provide that to my children, that I started learning more, just picking up things by osmosis. So people ask me why I'm attending fundamentals of Judaism on Sunday mornings, because it gives me a little bit of structure to things that I've been picking up bits and pieces over the years as I've progressed and trying to develop some sort of structure for my own children when we were distant from that in Central America for those many years. So,
thank you.
One thing I've noted, and this was not true when I had my bar mitzvah, it was not true when my children had their b'nai mitzvah, but it was true for our grandchildren, is that now as part of becoming a bar bat mitzvah, the teens are expected to do a service project.
Yeah.
The service project, and now they can actually read from the Torah portions, and I'm impressed and fascinated. They're doing that for my grandchildren now.
No, the service project is a good thing, and
it sort of emphasized that brings the Tikkun Olam aspect front and center.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think you're probably right. It's really it gives an action component to shul life, and it's become very important. I mean, maybe this is some synagogues it goes the other way, and it's all about service, but maybe that's important in our day and age. So it's really definitely Tikkun Olam has become much more over the last 2 decades, especially maybe, or 2-3 decades, it's become more and more a part of synagogue life of the Jewish community, and social, giving a voice to people's need and interest in social justice through a Jewish lens. And Judaism has so much to teach about social justice because we've been an oppressed people, and we've lived as a minority, and we've had to survive as tight-knit communities, and we've really come up with a lot of interesting wisdom over millennia of how to treat other people, of how to take care of each other. And some of that wisdom is very pertinent to our modern world. And I think it's really interesting how much of this old Talmudic wisdom is coming up in all kinds of areas to help inspire people, and to show them that Judaism has something to say about how you act in the world. And I think I remember when I spent a year in Nepal doing social justice work with an Israeli organization. And the head of that community, Rabbi Micha Odenheimer, he said he wanted to teach Jews. He said Jews often feel like they have to choose between being just human, just a person, and being Jewish, and that kind of particularistic tribal identity was hard for young people. And he said, what I want to teach them is their Judaism is the gateway to their humanity, that your Judaism can help inform your humanity and can help broaden your understanding of your humanity. And that's really interesting. And there were a lot of Israelis in that program, and it was very interesting because in Israel, social justice is not a big part of people's Judaism. People do a lot of social justice in Israel. I mean, especially in some of the kibbutz world. I mean, the amount of social workers and the really wonderful programs is incredible, but people don't do it through a Jewish lens. And so that's just beginning in Israel to all that social justice stuff is starting to come up more through a Jewish lens there. So we're going to move ahead, and there are 3 different components. We're only going to have time for one. One is tzedakah. The other is Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And the third is other laws of Tikkun Olam. So we were supposed to pick one of these. So we're going to pick, we can pick the image of God, tzedakah, or Tikkun Olam. And I was going to pick image of God.
I agree.
Okay, good. So here we go. One of the fundamental principles of Jewish theology is that all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and therefore possess an inalienable dignity and a worth. So we're going to look at some of how our tradition looks at that. So would someone like to read for us Genesis 1:26, right? This is the first chapter of Genesis, the beginning of the Torah, right? Not too long after God creates the world.
God said, "Let us make the human being in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and all the things that live on earth." And God created the human being in God's image. In the image of God, he was created. Male and female, they were created.
A lot you could go into all of that, what exactly that means, but the terms of the male and female and all of that. But what does it mean to be made in the image of God?
That one can be good and just, I suppose.
Okay, one could be good and just the way God is good and just. Anybody else? What does it mean to be made in the image of God?
I suppose it's a responsibility as well, right?
Okay, how so?
Well, I mean, if you're made in the image of God, you have to take into consideration the things that a God would take into consideration. Like if you rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and all the things that live on earth, you have a responsibility to take care of them.
Mm-hmm. We can't just live a life without purpose or meaning or responsibility. I like that.
Right.
Anybody else? What does it mean to be an image of God?
I would just expand on the responsibility. It's all the things that Judy just said, but then it's also a responsibility to try and see that spark of the divine in others.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Right, seeing the spark of the divine in others. Right, it says in the Shema, these words, you shall place them on your hand and between your eyes, and that refers to the tefillin, according to tradition. But when I think that you should place it between your eyes, whenever I say the Shema, I think, to me, that means don't forget that whenever I walk around the world, to see all other human beings, the godliness in them. It's a very powerful way to try to aspire to walk in the world, where every person you meet, you think they have the spark of God within them. They're of infinite value. Anybody else? What does image of God mean?
I tend to agree that that's my inclination, how I sense it as well. It's not just a literal repetition that God would look like me or I look like him. If we go beyond that, that has to do with the spiritual and the relationship we have with the world and with other people, that you say the divine spark. There's something.
The human life, right? I mean, we kind of take it for granted because the idea is filtered into much of Western society, but the idea that human life has value can be taken for granted, right?
Oh, yes, in some parts of the world, and people, if someone said, they even tell me, because I've been in other places, they say, no, life here is cheap.
Yeah, right. Life here is, in some places, life is cheap. Like really, life is cheap. It's one person die is not a big deal. I think in Israel, and no comment on the political nature of this, but when there was one soldier who was captured by Hamas, right? Gilad Shalit, right? One soldier who was captured by Hamas a decade ago. And we found out later that he was captured he didn't fight. He actually laid down the arms and could have, killed his kidnappers, but he didn't do any of that. But yet Israel released thousands of Hamas prisoners in return just because of one life, the power, the importance of life. And, that whether that was the right decision or not, But that's deeply embedded in our Judaism and our understanding that every single life is just so precious because it's godly, and can't do anything, break any Jewish law almost to preserve life. Okay, let's read.
Yeah, which is why I can't understand why there are Jews who think they shouldn't take the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, I don't get it either. I really,
that's such an important thing. I mean, on Yom Kippur, you're supposed to take care of yourself. And not do the rules if you need to take care of yourself. So I don't see how that, somebody who would believe that would not believe that you shouldn't take the COVID vaccine.
Or even this Shabbat in shul, right? We had a tornado warning in shul. Chances were the tornado, if it came, we're not going to blow off the roof of our shul, which is pretty solidly made. But you got to be careful, and you take all measures to be careful. And so we walked out of the sanctuary and we went and finished in the hallway. But the preserving of life, and I think in the ultra-Orthodox community, there's been some corruption of that ideal, and you see it with the vaccine, and you see it with other places where they, you can break Shabbat if your life is in danger, but they take that a little bit too literally. You really have to be in danger. If you fall and have a concussion, they would say you don't have to go to the hospital until after Shabbat because your life is not in danger. So I think they've gone off the mainstream Jewish path with that one. So let's read the Mishnah. Anybody want to read it?
Therefore, Adam was created alone in the world in order to teach you that whoever destroys a single life, the Torah considers it as though he has destroyed the entire world. And whoever saves a single life, the Torah considered it as though he had saved the entire world. And it is also for the sake of peace among people, so that no one can say to their fellow, my father was greater than your father. And finally, in order to display the greatness of the sovereign of sovereigns, the holy blessed one, since when a person stamps many coins with a single mold, they all look alike. But when the sovereign of sovereigns, the holy blessed one, fashioned all human beings with the mold with which the first person was formed, not one of them is like any other. Therefore, each and every human being is obligated to say, for my sake, the world was created.
One of the most beautiful texts of Judaism, this one. What do you make of what are they trying to say? It is also for the sake of peace among people, so no one can say to their fellow, my father was greater than your father. Why is he saying that?
I think that has to do more with, if you're talking about different religions or beliefs or different groups of people, that you just to maintain peace. Mine is better than yours. How many times is that reverted to a religious or some sort of a war or persecution or campaign or crusade to eliminate the world of the infidels, in quotation marks. So these, or just amongst one individual and another.
Very nice. I mean, what we ask sometimes, what does it mean? What is this Torah trying to teach us by having all human beings descend from one couple, right? Adam and Eve, even further to Adam. And this is one of the rabbinic interpretations for that story, is that story teaches us that we all come, ultimately every human being in the world is descended spiritually from the same source. And that means that nobody can say, I'm greater than you, because ultimately we all come from the same source. And I look at that more spiritually, that our souls all come from the same place. There's nobody's soul is ultimately on some level. I mean, some are more greaterly fulfilled. Some people have gone further in their spiritual journey and some have gone less, or other journeys, intellectual journey, but at its very base, every human is the same, has the same intrinsic divinity and holiness in them. And nobody can say, I'm greater than you are. And then this other idea, what do you make of this other idea? That when we stamp coins, every coin is the same, but when God makes us, even though we're all different, and therefore we can say, for my sake, the world was created. Not only can say, but we're obligated to say. What does it mean that every human being is obligated to say, for my sake, the world was created?
We're all here for a reason and a purpose. Somehow, one person we're missing, the world would be lacking something.
Beautiful.
That's good.
Maybe we also all have our own journey. No human journey is the same as the other. We all have our own journey, our own path, every one of us is unique. And we each have, we each, right, there's that Hasidic saying that says every human being should have 2 pieces of paper in each pocket. One piece of paper that says, I am but dust and ashes, and the other piece of paper that says, for me, the world was created. And that both of those is true, right? That what is one human being, right? We're just but dust and ashes, but every one of us is infinitely valuable.
And if you're repeating the coins, that might be a figurative way of saying that we all have the same value if it's the same coin from the same mold, even though we may have our own unique characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. We have an expression that there are 70 faces to the Torah, but there's also an expression that there are 70 is the biblical number for infinity. So there are infinite paths to Torah, just as there are an infinite number of human faces. So there's a midrash that at the end of days, all human beings will be in heaven and will point towards God in the middle and say, this was the God I was waiting for. But obviously every human being will be looking from a slightly different place. So it's telling us we each have our own vision, our own view of Torah, our own view of God, our own path to bettering the world. And each one of us has an infinitely valuable place in our world. Okay, so thank you all. We're going to conclude this whole class, this whole year, with a blessing. So I'm going to ask everybody to rise. We're going to say this blessing together. And then we're going to conclude by sharing, if anybody wants to, sharing something that they feel they got out of this course. Okay. Together, may you live to see your world
fulfilled. May your destiny be for worlds still to come. And may you trust in generations past yet to be.
May your heart be filled with wonder and your words be filled with insight.
May the songs of praise ever be upon your tongue and your vision be on the straight path before you.
May your eyes shine with the light of the holy word,
and your face reflect the brightness of the heavens.
Your lips ever speak
the words of the holy ancient one of old.
May
you always yearn to hear the words of the holy ancient one of all.
So anybody want to share one final, what was the experience of taking the course, this class like for them? Charles already mentioned, helped to give him some structure to some of the study he'd been doing. Anybody else? What will you take away? What will you do now?
So we've been doing Shabbat candles. Never done it before in 50 years.
Wow. And how do you enjoy it?
It sort of punctuates the week. I mean, it sort of makes you think about what you've done and it punctuates the week.
Lovely.
that's the most significant, one of the most significant moments for my wife. I can see she's deep in prayer and thought about many things every week when she does that. So that there's a pause there for something, and that's one of the essential things that we have done over the years, since the children were very small. So that it's a simple ritual as such, but it's always been very intense in that sense and very special for us.
Lovely.
That's the heart. That's one of the key issues for us. One of the core elements of Judaism, and that's focus on the family, and that brought the family together every Friday evening. To the point where
I'm not sure why we didn't do it, because it's the household, home, family stuff that I like the most.
And that's something for my son, for example. He's been wandering around from one place to other for years, and one way or the other, and he isn't too formal on many things, but I would say for the last year and a half, he was the one that started instigating that, coordinate with his 3 sisters for Friday evening candle lighting and bringing the family together. It's interesting now when he's in his. I'm going to tell you how you'll figure out how old we are, and he's in his early 40s now, and that's something that he has decided to reinforce in his own life.
Thank you for sharing. Lovely. Susan, anything?
Well, for me, it's been the beginning of forming a Jewish community locally, because before the pandemic, I always live streamed from places in New York. So this started that, and it's nice now that we're getting back to normal. We'll finally be able to meet in person.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you can join us for a Shabbat morning service and a Kiddush, and we're a pretty friendly group.
Yes, that is true.
All right, thank you, everybody. So nice to see you, and thank you for taking this course. It's been a pleasure on my part, and I know all the other teachers really enjoyed it too. And I think it was a great place to end on healing the world in Tikkun Olam, because that's our mission. All of our learning, all of our mitzvot, all of our quest for holiness, is so we can go out there and help.
Well, thank you all in the synagogue for putting these, developing and projecting these, conducting these programs.
Thank you. Well, if you enjoyed it, send us an email with your thoughts, and we'll put it up on our new website. All right. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you. Enjoy your Sunday. Bye.
Nice.
All right. Thank you. Bye now.